Check. Guess we are rolling. Hello there. Well, this isn't going to be poetry, I'll tell you that. So if you're expecting massive, awesome oration, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King style goodness, probably suspect you should click away. What I do have is just my story and how I came to Christ. I made a bunch of notes, and this is not my first attempt at this, as it's difficult. It's a difficult story that brings me here. And I've always wanted to make sure that I do justice to the story and I do justice to my Lord. So I prayed about it a bunch, and this is probably going to be as good as it gets. So this is my story, how I never actually wanted to be a Christian. So start the stories 70s, when I was in my first 10 years. Grew up in a trailer park to two hippie parents who were just blue-collar people. My mom grew up as a simple woman in a very poor farm home. Her father, a chronic alcoholic, and no surprise, she marries a chronic alcoholic. I am born when she's 19. I am an unwanted pregnancy. Though I never felt unwanted from my mother, I did feel unwanted from my father. My father always treated me like I was the interruption to his perfect life. And I always felt that I could never get his attention or could get enough. And I did my best to try and get his attention. I was an only child, so he was the only man figure that I would ever have in my life. So I tried in vain all years, even into my 30s, to try and get his attention, and because he didn't really have the emotional availability as I know now, or the capacity or the skills to be a father. I would have a father as a physical person, but I wouldn't have a father as an emotional person, which would set my life on a trajectory. So like I said before, this is going to be very unscripted and very raw and, I don't know, not very movie-esque. So rolling forward, I wouldn't do very well in school. My dad felt it was a really good idea to take us out of school and take us to Mexico when I was in grade 1. And we went to Mexico for a month. And of course, I mean, you know, there was great aspirations for me doing schoolwork while I was on the road to Mexico. We did a 5-day, we drove to Mexico. And we did a 5-day trip down there. I saw some of the greatest things I ever saw at 6 years old. And at 6 years old, I would see the ocean for the first time. Great adventure, but I would never finish that grade. I'd be held back. I would find that traumatizing, as I felt that I somehow was not smart. but whatever. I was just distracted, and for the first time, I saw the world as a very big place and an adventure to be had. I wanted to go back to the beach. Didn't want to go back to school. So I would be off kilter for the rest of my life, and that would start my journey to looking at life just a little bit different. I would struggle in school because I was always a little bit behind. And my mom and dad were always struggling because my dad was a chronic drinker, and he would be out a lot at night, and he would do what men do when they're out of the house and away from their wives. I would not understand much of this until I was much older. And me and my mom grew very close, very tight. We were each other's kind of friends. She was always my mom, but because she had me so young, and we kind of grew up together a little bit, and we became each other's comrades in our struggle. Time would move forward. At 12 or 11, my mom and dad would separate for the first time. And by 12, 13, my mom and dad would decide to divorce. And I didn't really understand that. I mean, they always struggled. But in a moment, my world was shattered, and my mom had to go get a job and had to get educated because she was just a stay-at-home mom. So she would go to hair school hours away from where we lived, and then because they didn't know what to do with me, and my dad couldn't really be a parent to me while my mom went to school, they would put me into a private school. I'm just going to pause for a second. I need to cough. Not really understanding anything what's going on. In a moment, at 12, all of a sudden, I went from spending a summer with my grandmother, who ran a confectionery at a local lake, to being announced that mom and dad were separating, and she's going to school. I'm going to a private school just close to where she was going to school in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Manitoba, yeah. And I'll be going to a private school just outside of Winnipeg. I had no idea what that was like. All of a sudden, I was in this private school, all boys, by myself. No idea what was going on with my family. No idea what was going on with myself, and no idea what to do. I was terrified. I didn't understand what was going on. Nobody really debriefed me. This is just sort of told this is what was happening. And in the first 6 weeks, I couldn't see my mom at all. So I was completely alone. One of the many times that would become a theme in my life where I'm alone a lot. Sorry, I have a bit of a cough. Anyway, I would spend a year in Selkirk, Manitoba, boys' school out there, and it would be very difficult. Many challenges were in the school I could go into, but that's not really the point of the story. So anyway, I was very alone out there, and I felt, I had to make friends and just deal with it. I would learn to hitchhike out there. I would learn to survive one of the many hardships that I would have to endure by myself, with no one to explain it to me. We go through that year, and Then I get back home to the small town that I grew up in, and I would still be desperately trying to get my dad's attention somewhere in my, whatever. I was spending many a late night where my dad would come over to the house drunk, and we'd sit at the kitchen table for hours, and I would try to explain to him or ask him if he could just stop drinking. And then him and mom could get back together, and we could put our lives back together, put our family back together. If he just... My mom would sit in the living room, we'd sit in the kitchen, and I would desperately try and put this family back together somehow, all to be in vain, because my dad preferred the bottle over everything else. Time would go on. I would try and go back to school. I'd be out of kilter again. I'd be held back another year. And school was just difficult. And I was very much dealing with trauma already. Varieties of ways, varieties of reasons. And moving forward, there would come an event that I don't know that I'll go into a lot of detail here right now. But there would become a very traumatic event that would result in a fatality to which I am responsible. And I would be responsible for a fatality where someone lost their life and it was my fault. And it was an accident, but I was still held responsible as I was responsible for it, even though it was an accident. And then that would result in basically a year in a young offender unit. That would change my life again for forever. And I would be alone again in another traumatic event. And I can look back and see that the private school event prepared me for this one. But this one was 10 times, 100 times more difficult, as I've never been incarcerated. And I was 14. I was 15 when the accident happened, and 15 when I went in. No, I was 16 when I went in. For years, I couldn't even tell what years were what. I still don't know, obviously, very well. I would get out of jail when I was 17, and now I'm sort of expected to start doing life. I finally just gave up on school. I never did graduate. I just moved on, kind of gave up on school. I always thought that I might go back, and technically I'm missing my grade 12 by a half credit. So, all good. I would move on from there to try and do life now. Spiritual life at this point, me and my mom would talk about God and stuff, but we never, I wouldn't say definitely weren't atheists, but we weren't Christians either. We talked about God, we talked about lots of things. And God was always an interesting topic of conversation. I loved talking about it. And I can even see back then, and an Anglican minister once remarked that I knew my Bible quite well, even for someone who didn't read it a lot. I seem to have it sort of inherent in understanding. You would remark on it a lot. I just thought it was good chatter, and I loved the idea of God. I believed in God, but He's out there, I'm out here. I'm down here, He's up there. He's doing his thing, I'm doing my thing. Is what it is. I didn't think there was much more to it than believing in God. And when I looked at Christianity from the outside in, I never saw much value in it. I just saw it as people who did what they believed in, maybe what they're raised in. And when I looked at Christianity and I looked at Christians, they were nice enough people, but I wanted to party. I wanted to be adventurous. I wanted to make my own rules. I wanted to go beyond the lines. I wanted to do whatever I wanted without consequence. I wanted to write my own story. I wanted to set my own course. I wanted to not be inhibited by some guy at the front tell me that I'm bad or that I need to look like him. I knew at this point that I was never going to be like anybody else. And no one is ever going to understand me because of the unique story that I had. I didn't understand me. I didn't expect anybody else to understand me either. So I wasn't going to be dictated to from some guy at the front who figured he had all the answers. So I never looked at Christianity as much as very attractive. I looked at more of a tight constraint, like a belt on your jeans that's like three notches too tight. So no thanks. 17. I end up sort of catch up some jobs, whatever, and picking up whatever, work, whatever. I ended up giving it takes me to 20 years old. At this time, I decided, well, I have a bunch of friends that are in Western Canada, Edmonton. So I thought I'd catch up with them. So I packed a duffel bag, and I had a friend take me out to the highway because now I know how to hitchhike, which I learned in private school. I would get right out the highway, and with $800 in my pocket, I would hitchhike to Edmonton. It took me 2 days. And some of the scariest, I had a scary moment where I was sort of locked in the back of a moving van for a good stretch. That scared me. They were nice guys. They bought me supper, but I wasn't get back in that van. I would end up in Edmonton. I would spend 2 years out there. And by the end of 2 years of just working, living with my friends, some of the best guys you'll ever meet. Some of these guys are still lifelong friends to this day. I slept on a couch for 2 years. Didn't care. Loved it. It's great. I was free. It was the first time ever that I came into a city that nobody knew me. Nobody knew my story. Everybody judged me at face value. Everybody seemed to like me. Where I'd come from, everybody knew my story. Every room I walked into, my story was there before me. And I was constantly judged, and judged poorly. It was a cloud that was never going to go away until I went away from the cloud, and that's exactly what I did when I went to Edmonton. So I would spend Edmonton, and Edmonton was great. I would wander downtown and when I wasn't working. And when I would start spending time in these really cool nightclubs, nightclubs there weren't places to go get drunk like I was used to. There were more places to go and dance and hang out, take in culture. And there was one place that had an art gallery in the bottom of it. And so I would go hang out there a lot and take in the art and realizing that these people were my people. Artists, creatives, people that thought differently than most. And silence this guy. And I started to discover that I'm actually an artist. And my mom was an artist, was an artist as well. So I would kind of work there, realizing that this job was going to swallow me whole if I didn't make a move to something where I wanted something better. So I started to dream up my own job, and I took a piece of paper and wrote down, my perfect job on the top of it. And whatever my perfect job was, I sort of designed it for myself. That would lead me into a hair career where I was a hair designer for 30, would turn into 30 years. But I'm jumping ahead of the story a little bit. So I decided by the time I also needed to get out of Edmonton, because by the time I left Edmonton, I was in a nightclub 2 to 3 times a week. And that wasn't going to work if I was going to try and make a run for the border with a career. So I would leave Edmonton and move to the city I now live in. And I would go there and I'll go to hair school. Still not knowing what the heck I'm doing with most of my life, and then kind of flying by the seat of my pants, which I technically do to this day. I would go to hair school, and then I would start to put my life together. During hair school, there was this guy that would start to come and get his hair cut by me. He was a young, good-looking guy who just loved God, and he would talk about how he recently gave his life to Christ, and he would talk to me about it, and I loved the conversation. It was great. I loved talking about God, like I always had, and felt I could keep up with the conversation. It was fine, and I know he was always angling to get me to come to church, and he was always angling to, get me to come to Jesus, and I knew that's what he was doing, and that's fine. Do your worst. As far as I knew, I already had Jesus because I believed he existed. I believed in God. I wasn't an atheist. Whatever. But I loved my girlfriend at the time, and I was not going to be quitting that, because that was my drug of choice, and I loved her, and she was great, and etc., etc., etc. So, but the more I talked with him, the more this hunger for God grew in my life, and I kind of, my hunger for God and those sorts of things were growing together. So now I'm thinking to myself, I got this career coming together. It's still, still in the rough sort of stages because it's new. Got this great girlfriend, and this God factor seems to start coming in. Then, how bad an idea could that be? Is to have God too? It's an idea, but like I said, wasn't going to change my life. Not interested in being a Christian. About a year would go on, I'd graduate hair school, and I would start working out of town for a little while as well. And I was apart from my girlfriend for a while, and then I would come back into town 2 weeks, 3 weeks in a stretch at this particular one time. And I picked her up, and excited to see her, of course. And I picked her up, and she got into the car. She was already crying, and I have to pause again. Hold on. Sorry about that. I think I'm gonna get this in one take. Crazy. God's answering my prayers. Anyway, back to the story. I would pick her up, and she's already crying when she gets in the car. I don't understand why. This is supposed to be a good thing. We have been apart, and now it's we get to be together and anticipating a nice night together, whatever. It was on a Saturday night. She gets in the car, and we're driving away. And I said, "What's going on? You seem to be upset." And I said, "Are you breaking up with me or something?" She says, "Yeah, I'm breaking up with you." And I'm like, "What?" drove around the block. I drove her around the block and just took her home and dropped her off. I was devastated. I didn't understand what was going on, and there's no way I could have. But I dropped her off, and I was absolutely crushed. My whole world was shattered. I realized that my entire life was motivated by living for her and living for the potential and the future and the building with her. I was kind of all chips in with her, not knowing a clue how to do a relationship or anything. Not that it didn't seem to matter. I didn't have a clue at that time. But all of a sudden she was gone and I was crushed. All the years of pain, all the past came crushing in on me. All the loneliness, all the trauma, all the abandonment, all the jail time, private school time. I'm in Saskatoon at this time, and all of a sudden the whole world flooded in on me, and I had no idea what to do with it. And I'd survived a lot by this point, and just on my own. I always had my mom, but a lot of it was on my own. And no matter what happened to me, even when I was traumatized inside of jail and whatever else, nothing could blow that candle out that was inside of me that said, you're not going to break me. Nothing's going to break me. You can beat this body all you want, but you'll never break the me that's inside. And when my girlfriend at the time left me, that candle got blown out. And I know it did. That was the last thing that I knew that you couldn't get to this, but that got to it, and it went out. And I realized that if that can be taken from me, then there's nothing that couldn't be taken from me. And I lost all will to live at that point. I wasn't suicidal, but my will to live was gone. So I would go to bed that night, wake up Sunday morning, and anybody who's been in a party house knows that Sunday morning in a party house is the quietest place that you'll ever find. So I would wake up early, and all I had was my thoughts and the silence to comfort me. And it wasn't very comforting. So I decided to put myself together, and I said I was going to go to a local mall, just get out of my head, get somewhere where there's other voices and other people. But as it turns out, at that time, malls were closed on Sundays where I lived, so no mall. So I decided to go to this guy's church. Again, still not intending to be a Christian. No interest in it. I just went to this guy's church. I arrived late. And the kind of church that this is, it's a different church than what I was used to. They sang, they danced, they ran around the church, and very exuberant about their faith, which was fine. Whatever. You can go do weird if you want. I'm just going to be over here. So I wandered in late, and I still remember to this day, third row, right side aisle. And there was all singing and dancing. I could have screamed at the top of my lungs, and they probably would have thought that I was praising the Lord or something. They didn't care. So I just had my own time to be in my head, and I remember just saying to God, I just spoke out loud. I said, if you still want this life, you can have it. I don't want it. And it was like throwing a broken little rag filthy little rag in front of him as the only offering that I had for him. That's how I saw myself. That's how I felt. So I kind of threw it down at his feet, like, if you want it, such as it is, you can have it. And then what happened next is the best way I can describe it. It's like an old friend that I never knew walked into my heart and walked into my life. And I immediately was washed over with this love that I knew it was pure love. I knew it was God kind of love. I knew it was Jesus. I knew it was him. In an instant, so many questions were answered that I wasn't even necessarily asking. But all of a sudden, this love washed over me like a ocean wave. And he spoke to me and he said 3 things that I'll never forget. He said, Sean, you can put all your faith in me and I will never let you down. The second thing he said is, I'll never leave you, nor will I ever forsake you. The third thing he said, he left it to last, and he did that on purpose because he was smart. God, right? He said, and you'll never again know what it is to be alone. And when he said that, I felt my knees come out. I fell to the ground, and I felt like I was melting under the love of God. I started to cry like I have never cried probably since or before. I sobbed in all the pain of the years of feeling so alone and so having to do it on my own just started to pour out of me, and I just sobbed. One hand on the pew for stability, and the rest was on my hands and knees. I just cried and cried. I don't know how long I cried for, honestly. Eventually, I would rise to my feet and I said, God, if you can touch my life like this, you'll never know a day without me either. And that time we covenanted it together. We had an eternal agreement where I would never leave him and he would never leave me. And that has held true for 3 decades now. And it's gotten me through some of the harder times in my life. But what would end up is I would be married. I'm now a pastor. I've been divorced. I do not have a perfect record as a Christian, but I do have a perfect Lord as a Christian, and that's the only thing that matters to me. I do not matter in my story. He matters in my story, and that's the only story I'm ever going to have for you, is him. If you look to me to find a perfect Christian, you'll be disappointed. But I will point you to the man who is perfect. He will never disappoint you. But that experience in my life lived the rest of it, burned in me to serve Christ, burned in me to seek his face continually. And forever feeling called to ministry as well, and had a burning call to the microphone to proclaim what Christ did for me and the power of God in a life and what he can do. And that's what brings me to you. Now, I've never bought into the religion, but I certainly bought into Jesus Christ, my Lord, my Savior, my King. I am a citizen of the Most High God, I'm a citizen of heaven. I'm a servant of the Most High God, such as I am. And I have all the scars to prove what it takes to go through, what it takes to live as a Christian. But that's what brings me to you. And that's what's made me the rogue preacher.